The snickers started before Travis Dunbar had even finished signing his name. Not loud, not all at once. Just a ripple across the polished assessment floor of Precision Shield Security's downtown Toronto facility, the kind of laughter that travels sideways between men who've already decided the outcome before anyone has moved. 32 applicants stood arranged inside the corporate screening room on the 19th floor, former RCMP Tactical, Canadian Forces veterans, private contractors who'd done close protection work in Geneva and Abu Dhabi and places they probably weren't supposed to name. They wore fitted training gear, polished boots, the kind of stillness that said their bodies were always slightly ready. Travis looked like he'd come from somewhere else entirely. His jacket was a faded navy, the right shoulder worn smooth from years of a rifle strap that was no longer there. His boots were clean but old, the kind of clean that came from care, not from being new. Under his arm, he carried a manila folder, and on the back of that folder, in orange crayon, his 9-year-old daughter Willa had drawn a tiny maple leaf that morning while he made her oatmeal and told her it was just a job interview. Nothing worth worrying about. He noticed the laughter, registered each face the way he'd once registered intersections at high speed, not staring, just knowing. 2 exits, 1 observation window running the north wall, 4 ceiling cameras, 1 with a delayed sweep. The guard near the south door favoring his left knee. The tall man in the center of the room with arms crossed and shoulders like a pickup truck who hadn't taken his eyes off Travis since the door opened. "Name," said the woman at the registration desk. "Travis Dunbar." "Previous employer?" "Freelance protective work. Prior to that, RCMP Tactical Division." The tall man laughed first, Rex Kavanagh. His name was already on the whiteboard near the front, listed beside military credentials and a private circuit record in executive protection that apparently impressed someone enough to underline it twice. He took 1 slow step forward, cracking a knuckle against his opposite palm. "RCMP retired," Rex said, loud enough to carry. "That mean you were writing traffic tickets in Manitoba?" A few men laughed. Somebody muttered something about mall security. Even the 2 observers visible through the north-facing glass. Executives from Fontaine Innovations, the company running this hire, exchanged a quiet, amused look. Up in the observation booth, Celeste Fontaine stood with her arms folded and her expression giving nothing away. She had approved the final open slot in this assessment after a phone call 2 days earlier. Anonymous tip, no name attached, 1 sentence only. "He'll be the last one you notice. That's why you need him." She had almost declined. Rex moved closer to Travis, comfortable in the space that most men stepped back from. "Serious question, you sure you're in the right room, buddy?" Travis looked up from the registration form for the first time. His eyes found Rex's and stayed there without effort or weight, the way water finds level. "Probably," Travis said quietly. "Is this the one where we find out if size is the same thing as ability?" The room shifted just slightly. Not silence yet, but attention refocusing toward the wrong person for the wrong reason. Rex grinned. He stepped back toward the sparring area and gestured broadly. "First screen's hands-on. Show us what retired RCMP looks like." Travis set his folder on the registration desk, the maple leaf faced upward. Rex came forward with the speed of a man who had ended arguments this way before. 1 heavy shoulder angled for a controlling impact, full weight committed forward, the kind of technique that worked almost every time against almost everyone. Travis moved toward him, not away. 1 hand caught the wrist before impact connected. The other rotated under the elbow in a motion so compact it looked almost polite. Hips turned. Rex's feet left the ground entirely, and he came down flat on the mat so hard the sound echoed off the glass walls like a single clean clap. Dead silence. Rex stared at the ceiling, genuinely confused. His body had moved before his mind had processed the instruction. And then every alarm in the building screamed red. Emergency lights strobed across the assessment room. The overhead PA system burst into evacuation tones. Through the observation glass above, the executives who had been mildly entertained 4 seconds earlier were on their phones, backing away from the window, voices elevated and faces pale. Travis didn't look at Rex again. He looked directly at the observation booth, exactly where Celeste had been standing, and she was already gone. A CEO didn't leave a protected observation deck unless someone had made her move or made her run. He crossed the sparring mat before any of the guards had coordinates for the situation. "Stand down," one of the building's internal security staff said at the stairwell door, arm raised. "Assessments suspended. Everyone wait here." Travis stopped close enough that the guard could read his face but not predict his next movement. "Your camera sweep on level 14 has a 6-second blind window," he said, voice flat. "If the breach timed around it, they're already past your checkpoint. The guard blinked. It was the blink of someone hearing something true from a person they hadn't cleared for truth yet. That half-second was enough. Travis pressed through the emergency door and took the stairs upward, 3 at a time. Behind him, Rex Kavanaugh was pushing himself off the mat. Humiliation had curdled into something harder, and he followed. Level 12 was wrong before Travis could see it. Security response failures announced themselves in 2 ways, too loud in one direction, too silent in another. Silence meant the corridor was already controlled. He found the first guard unconscious against the stairwell wall near level 13, badge stripped, radio gone. Travis crouched for 1 second, checked pulse, found the injection mark below the collar line. Clean sedation, fast acting, not amateur equipment. Someone had planned this with detailed knowledge of the building's response grid. His breathing stayed even on the way up. But something older returned inside his chest. The part trained under old tactical protocols. The part that had run into buildings when everyone else was running out. He'd thought he'd left that version of himself behind in the basement with Sarah's surface portrait and the boxes he hadn't opened since the funeral. Apparently, the body kept better records than the mind. The executive floor corridor held muted chaos barely contained. An assistant crouched behind a marble planter crying in silence. 2 others stood frozen near the elevator bank because no one had given them a direction worth moving in. On the floor, someone's dropped phone buzzed steadily against the tile, unanswered. But the first thing Travis noticed was the camera in the corridor's southeast corner, pointed deliberately at the wall, manually rotated. Someone familiar with the building had prepared exactly this moment. "Celeste Fontaine," he said to the crouching assistant. "Which way?" She looked up without recognizing him and pointed toward the east boardroom corridor with a shaking hand. 2 men in security uniforms. They said it was a controlled evacuation. Travis was already moving. Boots that looked older than this building moved without sound. At the east corridor bend, he used the reflection in a glass award display mounted at shoulder height to see around the corner before his body followed. 2 men in precision shield tactical jackets. One with a hand resting near a concealed sidearm. Their stance protected them before anything else did. Weight distributed wrong for trained corporate security, front heavy, military retrained too recently to have smoothed the edges. They were not Fontaine building staff. Celeste stood 3 meters away from them, chin elevated, refusing whatever they were asking. She was not a woman who frightened easily. Travis could see it in the set of her jaw, in the way she kept her eyes on both of them simultaneously. One of the imposters caught movement in his peripheral vision a fraction too late. Travis closed the distance in silence, took the nearer man by collar and forearm, and drove him shoulder first into the corridor wall with enough force to knock the breath out cleanly. The second man reached for his weapon. Celeste dropped to one knee without being told. Good instincts. While Travis deflected the draw with one hand, drove his elbow into the attacker's throat with the other, stripped the weapon, and reversed his grip to pin the man face forward against the boardroom glass. The first attacker tried to recover. One controlled strike ended it. Both were down in under 4 seconds. Celeste rose slowly. Her hair had come loose from its clasp. Her expression was not gratitude, it was precise assessment, the look of someone recalibrating a situation with new information. She looked at the 2 unconscious men, then at Travis. "Who exactly are you?" she said. He checked both men before answering, removed their radios, and checked the pulse at the nearer attacker's wrist. "Right now, the person who noticed your evacuation team was wearing the wrong boots." She looked down. Precision Shield's contracted staff wore non-reflective tactical soles, standard issue matte. These men wore polished dress-style combat boots, institutional issue from a different source. The kind purchased in bulk by organizations that prioritized uniformity over fieldwork. "You were downstairs," she said, at the assessment. Still technically unemployed. Her jaw moved slightly. Before she could respond, one of the unconscious men twitched toward his collar. Travis pulled the transmitter free before it reached activation, a small encrypted unit blinking amber. Celeste stared at it. "That's not standard equipment." "No," Travis said. "It's coordinated. Someone with purchasing access and an existing supply relationship." Footsteps came hard from the north corridor. Rex Kavanaugh arrived with 2 building security guards, all of them breathing fast, arriving too late to matter. Rex stopped when he saw both imposters grounded and Travis holding the stripped sidearm. "Hand that over," Rex said, recovering authority like a man reaching for a jacket that didn't quite fit anymore. "Now." Travis passed the weapon grip first to the nearest actual guard without looking at Rex. Checked the chamber, ceramic rounds. The guard checked. His expression changed immediately. Rex hated what that expression meant more than he hated Travis. Celeste had already turned toward the boardroom door. "Seal this level. No movement without my sign-off." She paused once without turning. "Mr. Dunbar, with me." Rex opened his mouth. Celeste cut him off before sound arrived. "Not you." That landed differently than any physical strike could have. Travis followed her without comment. The Fontaine boardroom occupied the northeast corner of the executive floor. Glass on two walls, the city spreading in the early gray of a November afternoon. Emergency lighting painted everything a slow-burning red. Outside, Toronto continued without concern. "Talk," Celeste said. She stood at the window, arms folded, reading him the way she would read a term sheet with a deadline on it. "Where did you train?" "Long time ago." That phrasing usually means tactical, federal. Usually. "And now you're applying for a private position." Travis stood near the wall, choosing angle out of habit. "My daughter's school called twice this morning while your alarms were going across the radio bands. I missed the confirmation window for her after-school pickup contact. I need to fix that before the day ends." Something in Celeste's posture recalibrated. Not softness, calculation at a different frequency. "You have a daughter." "She's 9. She drew a maple leaf on my application folder this morning and told me the job was mine before I'd even left the apartment." "And you still ran toward armed men?" Travis glanced toward the corridor glass where the unconscious imposters were visible beyond the window. "Running the other way rarely improved armed men in my experience." Andrea Holst entered then, Fontaine's head of internal security, tablet in hand, the particular tension of someone who had been competent at their job until tonight, and was now accounting for a gap they hadn't anticipated and couldn't explain. She stopped short when she saw Travis standing beside the CEO. "Ma'am, our access log for levels 12 through 14 was wiped. 11 minutes. Someone used internal administrator credentials." Celeste took the tablet. "Administrator clearance. How many people in this building hold it?" Andrea hesitated. 8, all executive tier. The silence that followed was a different shape than before. Less panic, more poison. Celeste's own executive circle. Someone she had trusted with the architecture of the building's security had offered that architecture to someone else. Andrea looked at Travis with careful suspicion. "We haven't run background on him." "You shouldn't take my word for it," Travis said. "Run my name, you'll find less than you expect." That's not reassuring. It's honest. Her tablet chimed. She read, frowned. "Your applicant file was submitted 2 days ago through our intake portal. No processing trail before that point. No prior digital footprint in our system." Travis went still. He had submitted his application himself on paper at the Precision Shield office on King Street, the way the posting had specifically requested. He had a handwritten receipt. He remembered the address. "Someone replaced your file," Andrea said. That was not administrative error. That was placement. Travis thought of the envelope that had arrived at his Leslieville apartment last Thursday. No return address, handwriting that belonged to someone who had learned penmanship in an era that still required it. Fontaine Innovations Head of Protection. Assessment is November 14th. Final slot available if you present by 9. No signature. He had almost thrown it away. Willa had found it on the kitchen table before he could, read it aloud in the voice she used for important announcements, and said with complete certainty, "Dad, lucky things come in plain envelopes." He had laughed at that. He was not laughing now. Celeste watched the realization arrive on his face and read it with precision. "You didn't come here entirely by choice." Before he could answer, his phone vibrated. Willa's school. He looked at the screen. Third call. Celeste said, "Answer it." He did. "Mr. Dunbar." The school secretary's voice was carefully patient, the voice of someone trained to handle uncertain situations without escalating them. "Willa's asking us not to worry you, but your pickup authorization window closed 20 minutes ago. I'm delayed. I'll have someone there within the hour." Willa's voice broke through from behind the secretary, closer than it should have been. She had clearly walked to the desk mid-call. "Dad, did you get hired yet?" He looked through the boardroom glass at the unconscious attackers, the armed guards beyond, the city behind red-lit windows, the CEO watching him with an expression somewhere between exhaustion and precise recalculation. "Not yet," he said, still in progress. Willa was quiet for a moment. "You sound like when something matters. Go finish your drawing. I'll be there." "Promise?" He closed his eyes once. Sarah had told him never to promise things outside his control. He had agreed with her in theory every time he broke the rule. Promise, he said. The line closed. Celeste said nothing for several seconds. The city sat outside the window doing what cities did. Then, Mr. Dunbar, until I know who arranged your file and who put armed men outside my boardroom, nobody leaves this floor, including you. Lock the boardroom too, Travis said. Why? He looked toward the cluster of executives gathering in the corridor beyond the glass. Frightened, uncertain, reaching for phones. Because whoever failed to remove you from this building may still be sitting at your next meeting table. Andrea was already moving for the interior lock when the lights died completely. Full building blackout. Emergency power returned in pulses, weaker now, red and rhythmic, filling the boardroom like something breathed. Then the fire evacuation protocol activated. Not the breach alarm, but the full building PA, synthetic voice, calm and absolute. Immediate evacuation required. Proceed to the nearest designated exit. This is not a drill. Celeste looked up. I didn't authorize that. Exactly why you don't move, Travis said. Somewhere above them, glass shattered. Below, through the floor, they could feel the coordinated movement of too many feet directed in too many places. Not panic, but direction. Engineered chaos with a destination built into it. Travis moved to the boardroom door and listened with his body angled to the frame. Evacuation protocol pushes executives toward predictable exits. Predictable is where they can script what happens next. Celeste's voice came quiet but unbent. Then where do I go instead? He looked at the service corridor running behind the executive kitchen, at the maintenance hatch recessed in the north wall, where acoustic paneling covered the original building infrastructure. The kind of access point that appeared on no visitor floor plan. Places that weren't designed for people like you, he said. Rex's voice arrived from the outer corridor, calling Celeste's name from the wrong direction to trust. The three of them, Travis, Celeste, Andrea, moved into the service corridor before Rex reached the boardroom door. The maintenance passage smelled of dust and decade-old electrical work, and the particular silence of spaces that renovation money forgot. Travis went first, one hand on the conduit rail, navigating the dark with the body memory of training that had never fully departed, no matter how many years of night shift mall rounds and school plays, and Saturday grocery runs had been layered over top of it. Celeste followed without complaint. Andrea came last, her dead tablet still in her hands, because releasing it would have meant accepting how far outside every protocol she had already moved. At the junction between levels 14 and 15, Travis stopped, pressed his palm flat to the wall and listened. They're directing people toward the Rideau exit, he said. South Terrace route, Andrea said, checking the floor plan from memory. Duncan uses that as the standard executive extraction path when... She stopped. Celeste said it instead, her voice quieter than before. Duncan scheduled the South Terrace as our emergency secondary this morning. He said it was updated procedure. Duncan Leary, Chief Financial Officer, Fontaine Innovations, 12 years in that chair. Nobody said anything further. The sentence didn't need completion. Travis pulled the service grate at the east junction, and they emerged into the records corridor of level 15. Server housings, filing infrastructure, the low hum of climate control equipment. Empty at first reading. He used the reflection in a wall-mounted defibrillator case to check the corridor before stepping out. One camera in the corner pointed deliberately at the wall. Two men near the northeast boardroom entrance, tactical jackets, no visible badges. One placing something beneath the executive conference table through the half-open door, careful and unhurried. Travis studied the positioning for 4 seconds. That's not explosive, he said quietly. Andrea looked at him. Directional ballistic suppressor, small caliber burst designed to present as crossfire inside a genuine evacuation. One primary target, 2 collateral wounds, plausible confusion in an already documented emergency. Celeste looked at the conference table through the gap in the doorway, at her chair at the head of it, at exactly where she would have been sitting in 3 minutes if the evacuation had gone as designed. Travis looked at Andrea. When I move, lock the boardroom door behind us, interior bolt. Don't open it for anyone who doesn't give you my name first. That's not in any manual I've read. Nothing about tonight is. Celeste caught his arm before he moved, not to stop him, but to make him look at her directly. Duncan won't be the one standing near the device. He never is, Travis said. People who write plans like this position themselves near the explanation, not the execution. He moved. The first guard registered motion a fraction too late. Travis was already past the point where turning was useful. One forearm strike redirected the stagger hard into the wall. The second man inside the boardroom brought his weapon up, but the door hit him from the wrong angle when Andrea slammed it inward, throwing his aim high. 2 shots dissolved into the ceiling. Travis crossed the room before the echo settled, struck the wrist, stripped the weapon, and drove the shooter across the conference table hard enough to fracture the far edge. Celeste entered behind him. Duncan Leary was standing near the far side of the room. 3 senior executives arranged themselves behind him like furniture, all performing surprise at carefully different speeds. Duncan's face held the expression of a man who had practiced concern until it fit like a tailored suit. The look of someone prepared to narrate an alternate version of events the moment the room reached equilibrium. His right hand held a small remote, thumb resting against the activation surface. Travis was already crossing when Duncan pressed it. The suppressor discharged, not toward the ceiling, toward the chair. The compression burst tore through the seat back and into the glass wall behind it, shattering 2 meters of window outward into the November air above the city. Travis had hit Duncan's arm mid-press, the angle diverted by 40 degrees. Not enough to prevent the discharge, enough to redirect the target. Glass exploded across the room. 1 executive dropped flat. Another screamed from somewhere near the door. Duncan staggered, lost the remote, and immediately turned his pointing finger toward Travis. Security. He triggered it. This man has no verified file, no credentials. He's been operating inside this building without clearance all evening. Your thumb was on the switch, Celeste said. That cut through everything else in the room. Duncan straightened his tie, an extraordinary reflex for that particular moment, as if the gesture could reconstruct the architecture of the story he preferred. We're taking the word of an uncleared applicant over a 12-year executive relationship? Andrea stepped forward, the maintenance wrench still in her hand. The suppressor uses procurement routing from your division's approved vendor registry. I pulled it from the cached log before the system wipe completed. Duncan's expression moved through several rooms in under 2 seconds. Calculation, contingency review. And then underneath both, the flat, tired look of someone whose preferred narrative had run out of road. 12 years, he said. Almost reasonable, almost explanatory. 12 years of managing the parts of this company that Celeste refused to look at squarely. The restructuring Helix partners required. The margin compression nobody wanted discussed publicly. I kept the lights on. I kept investor confidence intact. And she was about to open a parliamentary inquiry into the same structures that kept this company from collapsing 3 separate times. Celeste's voice came cold enough to lower the temperature in the room. So you arranged to have me killed over an audit. I arranged to prevent a company from falling apart publicly because the person holding the gavel cared more about clean hands than operational survival. A window shattered on the opposite rooftop. Travis registered the sound before processing it as a sniper origin point and was already moving, throwing himself sideways into Celeste, taking her behind the overturned section of conference table as the first round came through the broken window wall and stripped plaster from the ceiling where her head had been. The second shot came lower. Travis pulled Andrea down by the shoulder. The third hit the chair mount instead of Celeste's spine because Travis had shifted the angle with his body, his jacket taking a deep gouge from ricocheting metal and glass that tore through fabric and opened the skin below the shoulder. Pain arrived white and immediate. He stayed vertical by deciding to. Andrea crawled to the emergency shutter panel, backup system, manual override, and drove it down. Steel dropped across the shattered window wall. Darkness. Duncan Leary was gone, side door still swinging. The 3 of them breathed in the dark for a moment that felt longer than it was. You're hit, Celeste said. Not deep. The lie came automatically, the reflex of someone trained never to broadcast damage. You're bleeding through your jacket. It'll hold. Andrea checked the side door and returned. Duncan cleared the south elevator manually. He had an exit sequence already loaded. Celeste stood. Her composure returned not as calm, but as something harder and more durable than calm, the kind of composure that came from deciding rather than from the absence of fear. Lock every floor. Provincial authorities directly, not through building security. Travis pressed his palm flat against the table edge to stay vertical. The accounting would come later, all at once the way it always did. Celeste watched him. She looked at the old scar below his collar, visible now where the jacket had torn. The kind of scar that came from something that had passed through rather than passed. How many times have you done this? She asked quietly. Travis looked at the steel shutter where sniper rounds still faintly ticked against the outside surface. His phone vibrated. Willa, he answered. Dad, Her voice was the quiet of someone who had been waiting without wanting to seem like they were waiting. Mrs. Osei says, I can stay in the art room until you come. I made you something. Travis turned slightly toward the wall. What did you make? A picture of you getting the job. You're wearing a better jacket in it. Despite everything, his mouth moved. My jacket is fine. Willa's voice dropped to the particular register she used when she was being serious in the way children were serious, without strategy, without protection. You sound like when you miss Mum. Celeste and Andrea both heard it. Travis looked at the wall. I'm coming soon, an hour, maybe less. You said promise before. I know. A pause. Okay, I'll finish the picture. The boss lady in it looks nice. I gave her really good shoes. The line closed. The ruined boardroom held what followed without comment. Celeste looked at the blood on Travis's palm where he'd caught glass on the way through the firing angle, at the shattered furniture, at the chair where she should have died, then at him. Sarah Dunbar, she said quietly. Was that your wife's name? Travis looked at her. The anonymous call that reached my office 2 days ago, Celeste said. One sentence, then disconnected. I had the number traced afterward. Legacy voicemail account, flagged inactive, archived under a Fontaine compliance contractor from 6 years back. She paused once. The account was registered to S. Dunbar. The room was very still. Sarah did a compliance audit contract before Willa was born, Travis said slowly. Before I knew she'd taken federal subcontract work at all, she didn't talk about it. She flagged irregularities in Fontaine's financial structures 6 years ago, Celeste said. Filed it through a sealed review code. Duncan's shell account transfers. The Helix capital movements. The review was buried before it could be formally opened. She held his gaze without looking away from it. 3 weeks after the filing, the contractor who submitted it was in an accident on the 401. Travis said nothing. I didn't know, Celeste said. I want you to understand I didn't know. The grief that arrived then came not as anger or accusation, but as weight. Familiar, redistributed. The shape of something carried so long the edges had worn smooth, and the sensation of having it finally named felt less like revelation than like being given permission to set it down in the right room for the first time. He had walked into this building thinking he needed a job. He had walked into the last act of a case Sarah had opened without him and never gotten to close. He pressed his hand flat against the wall until the moment passed enough to breathe through. An hour later, the executive lobby held provincial investigators, internal affairs officers, and the specific controlled quiet that followed violence when enough witnesses existed for truth to become official. Duncan Leary had been taken at the underground level by 2 officers who arrived before he reached the exit ramp. He had not gone quietly, but he had gone conclusively. Travis sat on a low lobby bench while a paramedic dressed his shoulder. The wound was not deep, it would scar. Celeste stood near the glass entrance watching the first streetlights of evening come on across the city. November in Toronto arrived early with dark, and the glass reflected it back with the particular honesty of large windows at the end of a long day. You saved more than just me tonight, she said. Travis watched the paramedic work. I know what Duncan did. Whatever Sarah found 6 years ago has somewhere to go now. That's not nothing. No, Celeste said, it's not nothing. The lobby doors opened. Willa came through at a run. School sweater slightly askew, art folder under one arm, the particular sprint of a child who has been patient for exactly as long as patience was a reasonable request and has now reached the outer limit of it. Andrea Holst walked in behind her, having collected her personally once the building cleared, because Travis had mentioned the school once in passing and Andrea had written it down. Willa stopped when she saw the bandage. Her face moved through 3 things quickly: worry, then assessment, then a careful particular relief that children developed when they lived with someone who sometimes came home from things that required relief. You said tired on the phone, she said, accusatory in the way only children could make concerns sound like a formal charge. Travis held out his good arm, and she walked into it with the certainty of someone who had practiced this exact arrangement many times and trusted its geometry completely. I'm all right, he said. You're bandaged. That's considerably less than not all right. She pulled back just far enough to look at his face. Then she turned and looked at Celeste with the frank, unfiltered appraisal of a 9-year-old operating entirely without diplomatic training. Are you the boss? Willa asked. Celeste crouched to her height without hesitation. I am. Did my dad get the job? Celeste looked at Travis over Willa's shoulder. Something in her expression that had been tightly managed all evening finally allowed itself to settle. Not much, but enough to be visible and meant. Only if he agrees to the terms, she said. Willa turned back to her father with an expression of elaborate 9-year-old patience, the look of someone who had been waiting on adults to reach an obvious conclusion, and was prepared to wait a reasonable additional amount of time, but not indefinitely. Dad, she said, say yes. Travis looked at the lobby around him, the investigators moving through, the glass doors, the city beyond them doing what cities always did, continuing without regard for any particular building or any particular night. He looked at the manila folder still sitting on the registration desk across the room where he'd left it, the orange maple leaf facing upward under the lobby lights. He looked at his daughter. Yes, he said. Willa nodded once, formally the way someone ratified an agreement that had been pending far too long. She opened the art folder and held it up for Celeste to see, a man in a jacket standing beside a woman in careful crayon shoes, and between them, small and certain, and drawn without any doubt at all, the kind of ending only children were unself-conscious enough to illustrate before it arrived. Outside the glass doors, the streetlights held steady against the November dark. And for the first time in 6 years, Travis Dunbar felt something that was neither the old alertness nor the familiar weight of grief, but something quieter and more unfamiliar, the sense that the morning coming after this night might be one he was finally ready to meet.